When I was in high school, I worked for a short time with our school newspaper. And this was a pretty light affair. We had hard-hitting exposés, like what is in the cafeteria chili. And one student talks about their plans after graduation. There was crosswords and there were comics, but there was also a horoscope section. Now, I obviously knew the person who wrote these little ditties, and issue after issue, I would watch as they sat at their desk until an idea would come to their mind, and they would write down something like, Capricorn, luck is favoring you this month. Take a risk. It was all very generic. It was all very positive or uplifting. It was all completely made up. What was fascinating, however, was watching how students some would gravitate. They would eat this up. Some seemed to view this horoscope, this cosmically cryptic message, almost as something to guide their lives. And you know what? Today, it's still the same. Through things like horoscopes, or psychics, or tea readers, or stock market projections, or whatever is the latest fad, people are looking for guidance. They are searching for some shepherd, some authority that might guide them through the mysterious twists and turns of life. Jesus, we hear, says that he is the good shepherd. But when he says that, is that the image that he's talking about? Right? That we can say, well, some have horoscopes as their guide. We just have Jesus as our guide. Same thing. When Jesus refers to himself as the Good Shepherd, he does what he always does. He takes an image that would have been known in the day and he kind of switches everything around. He emphasizes something contrary to popular images or associations. And he does that so that we can understand that Jesus is different. That Jesus as our shepherd is different than any other would-be shepherd in our lives. For Jesus being our shepherd means primarily two things. And we could say that the guidance that he offers us, like shepherd to a sheep, it is rooted in two primary realities, and that is intimacy and that is sacrifice. That is what it means for Jesus to be our good shepherd. That's what it means for Jesus to guide us. So if you wish to follow along, I invite you to pick up your pew Bibles and turn to John 10. So I have grown up in urban or suburban areas all my life, so I've never actually literally known a shepherd. But in Jesus' day, however, shepherds were common, right? They were constantly in the fields abiding, watching their flocks by night. They were part of the scenery. Right? You can say that they were part of the backdrop to regular life. And so people in Jesus' day, the people that Jesus is talking to here, they would recognize, they would understand the intricacies of shepherding in some sense. But more than that, they would also understand that shepherd was an image. So there are many passages in the Old Testament that speak to the religious leaders or the temple priests as shepherds of the people. And this is why even today, we use terms like pastor sometimes, because it takes up this image of tending to the flock. And Israel understood that. But the problem was that Israel often suffered under bad shepherds. There are passages in prophets like Ezekiel where God calls out the religious leaders for being a bad shepherd, and in one place for even devouring the sheep that they were to care for. So for any rabbi or leader to assume the image of a shepherd and to say, well, I am a shepherd to the people, this would have brought forward all sorts of negative images and associations. Like every other would-be shepherd that went before, it meant that they would be a bad shepherd. So it's in the midst of this negative association with shepherds that Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. And he's the good shepherd first and foremost because he intimately knows and he cares for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. The closeness, right, that exists between the members of the Trinity, that intimate relationship between the three that can never be fully imagined or fully understood. This is the same closeness that he says, I have extended to you. The same closeness that he says, I am with you. I know you. And I invite you to know me. The Good Shepherd knows you. He recognizes you. He calls you by name. There is nothing about your life that the Good Shepherd is not aware of or willing to be a part of. Do you know why the sheep recognize the voice of the shepherd? It really is three things. It can be boiled down to love, trust, and familiarity. The sheep, to a good shepherd, love the shepherd. They trust the shepherd. And they are familiar with that shepherd's presence. It's the same reason why dogs recognize the sound of their owner's car pulling into the driveway. It's the same reason why you can recognize your child's cry halfway across a crowded grocery store. Because when your heart is directed towards someone, you are formed by the nuances of their presence. Jesus' presence is with his sheep. Jesus says that he is the good shepherd, not simply because I have the best knowledge, but because his heart moves toward his sheep. And he leads them and guides them from a place of closeness and from a place of love. Jesus is a shepherd unlike any other would-be pretend shepherd that offers guidance for our lives. Because Jesus guides us from the place of standing with us. And the grace in this passage is that this love of the Good Shepherd, this intimacy of the Good Shepherd, it is not just for the elite and the pristine. Jesus says, I have other sheep that need to hear my voice. And he's speaking here of the Gentile community. False shepherds like to say who is in or out. And the Good Shepherd calls us all to him. And so he heals the blind, and he cares for the broken, and he welcomes the wayward, and he finds the sheep who are lost or confused, and he soothes them, and he heals them, and he loves them. It's a reality that we will never find in anyone else. This intimacy of Jesus is only part, however, of why he is the Good Shepherd. Jesus says that the Good Shepherd sacrifices himself for his sheep. The prophets criticized the leaders of Israel because they cared more for themselves than the sheep. They cared more for lining their own pockets. They cared more for increasing their own fatness rather than caring or protecting the sheep. In fact, through Israel, God charges them with actually devouring the sheep, eating the ones they were to care for. If you turn to tarot cards or psychics or horoscopes or even stock market projections, you continue, what you have to contend with is a careless world. What you have to contend with is this randomness that you will never fully be able to navigate. Because whatever the horoscope might say to you, it does not actually care whether that is realized in your life. Whether you are really good at managing the stock market or not, you have to realize that the stock market has no feelings towards your advancement or your life. But Jesus, in intimacy, is so overwhelmingly concerned about your livelihood and your experience of life and love that the Good Shepherd sacrifices himself for the sake of the sheep. He says the hired hand, or we could say the false shepherds, care nothing for the sheep. When he sees a wolf coming, he abandons the sheep. Because ultimately, false shepherds are all about themselves. But Jesus says, I know my sheep, and I lay down my life for my sheep. If you look at the wider passage, Jesus speaks about wolves and thieves and robbers, and it's a pretty harsh environment, which is why in the Old Testament, shepherds were kind of rough and tumble kind of people. Jesus is saying that the good shepherd gives his life in order to thwart the attacks of the sheep's enemies, to ensure the life of the sheep. This is who I am, Jesus says. I'm the good shepherd. I don't just tell you where to step. I don't just know you in and out. I am not the one who gives lovely messages from afar that you can choose to adopt or not. No, I am the one who steps in front of you. I am the one who steps in front of you to protect you from all that threatens you. I am the one who fights for you. And I'm the one who knowingly and willingly lay down my life for my beloved sheep so that they may live. There are all sorts of images that we can try to employ to image this. We sometimes talk about the judge leaving the bench in order to pay the fine for a defendant so they can go free. We talk about a skydiving instructor who skydives with a student only to find that their chute does not open. So in order to save the student, the instructor flips around so that when they hit the ground, the student lands on the skydiver. The instructor sacrificed their life so that the student will live. Or if we are more fantasy-oriented, we may talk about the Chronicles of Narnia, of how Aslan sacrifices himself to save Edmund from execution. All of these examples are lovely, but they never fully grasp the full nuance of Jesus as the one who sacrifices himself for his sheep. Michael Green, who is a British evangelist and author, once wrote that the sacrifice of Jesus is utterly glorious and fabulously unique. For all the people hearing Jesus, for all of us hearing Jesus today, what this means is that Jesus offered himself so that you would know the life and the love that comes from God. That's what it means when he says, I'm the good shepherd. Because he lays down his life only to take it up again. This life with God, this love of God that we so often talk about, this radical intimacy and relationship with the divine that stands at the heart of Christ the shepherd. This is present and available to each and every single one of us every single day of our lives. It does not go. Like a shepherd, a good shepherd, who journeys with his sheep. The shepherd is always there. So let me conclude by asking a question. How well do you know Jesus as your shepherd? Jesus says, I know my sheep, but my sheep also know me. And they know Jesus because they spend time with him. They spend time with a shepherd who comes to them. It's really hard to know Jesus as our good shepherd if we are constantly turning to other would-be shepherds in our lives, or if we're trying to lead ourselves. There is a richness, there is a fullness, there is a completeness to our lives when we live them faithfully connected to Jesus. And just like Jesus is not our good shepherd just for a moment or just for a day, so too our embracing of Jesus as our good shepherd is not a one-time thing. It is a reality that we are called to live out each day of our lives, in each sphere of our lives. Every single day as we rise, we should turn to Jesus as our good shepherd. In each new situation or encounter in our lives, we should enter into that knowing that we walk beside or we walk behind the good shepherd. Is there an area of our life where you are in need of the shepherd's touch? Is there a place in your life where you need to hear that you are known in the depths of who you are, and with that knowledge you are held and loved? Jesus is the good shepherd. This means that there will never be any reason for him to forsake you or leave you or withdraw his affection from you. There will never be anything you face where he will not be present for you, and his life will not be given as a strength for your own. All you need to do is be open to that relationship. Be willing to trust that just possibly Jesus could be the very source of life and hope and guidance that you are looking for. Why turn to other shepherds when the good shepherd the best shepherd, is calling you. Amen.